Hi, I'm Harry Moser. I'm the founder and president of the Reshoring Initiative. For 22 years, I was the president of machine tool builder, now called GF Machining Solutions, EDM, five-axis milling machines, products like that. I'm a member of the Industry Week Manufacturing Hall of Fame. I advised President Obama on reshoring. For 20 years, I focused on skilled workforce, and now for 12 years on reshoring. In this session, I will bring the two subjects together. And as an example of that, companies that report to us their cases of reshoring get a free Manufacturing is Cool t-shirt. And I hope by the end of our discussion today, our time together, that you'll agree that manufacturing is cool and that reshoring is helping it happen. So I need to share the screen here and bring up my presentation for you. And okay, and I'm hoping you can see that. For the country, increased manufacturing provides restored income equality, reduced environmental impact, self-sufficiency for the country. A lot of things that many of today's youth think are very important. For American workers, it provides individually high pay and benefits without debt, career advancement, entrepreneurial opportunities, high-tech toys, the machine tools that I sold and that are typically now found in almost all machining factories are incredibly exciting to work with. The satisfaction of producing a real tangible product, not a bunch of paper scattered around a desk, not a lot of chit chat, some chit chat, but real things that you can be proud of that other people will use. The COVID pandemic, exemplified by the COVID picture there, and the Suez Canal blockage happened a couple of weeks ago, um, demonstrate the societal risk of being so dependent on other countries, including China, for essential products. Restoring US self-sufficiency is critical for the country. It was a high priority for Trump. It is a high priority for President Biden. And by doing so, we'll provide increased career opportunities for smart, motivated youth. I'm going to share some data on skilled workforce. The data is dated from when I did it 12, 20 years ago, but the current data would reach the same conclusion. The wages have moved up, everything's moved up in proportion, but the demand for skilled workforce is still extremely high and growing. So again, the topic is reshoring and manufacturing careers and how the two work together, how one amplifies the other. Give you a little background on me. I grew up in Elizabeth, New Jersey. The biggest thing in town was Singer sewing machine. This factory 110 years ago was the largest factory in the world. 2.5 million square feet, 5,000 workers. It was a Goliath of its time. My grandfather was a foreman. My dad ran about a third of the factory. I worked there summers in high school and college. And I went past 20 years ago and nothing of Singer is made there. As far as I can tell, nothing is made in the US. It's all imported. And I cried for what my family, the city, the state, the country had lost. And I saw similar devastation to other industries throughout the country. And I said, this isn't acceptable. And eventually I started the Reshoring Initiative to turn that around and bring those jobs back. To give you a little perspective on this, manufacturing share of the economy, that's GDP, the economy, has been cut about in half. But it isn't because manufacturing isn't important. It isn't because we don't consume goods and we just consume services. In fact, the consumption of goods in the US has grown 2.5% per year, which is faster than the growth of the overall economy. So we're buying, if anything, an increasing proportion of goods. We're just not making enough of them. So as a result, we have a growing trade deficit. The trade deficit is the case when we import more than we export. And we were in good shape up until about 1979, 1980. And since then, the trade deficit has grown substantially. to the point where in the last few years it's about 800 to 900 billion dollars per year, but at least it's flat the last couple of years. That's the good news you can see here. Manufacturing jobs as a percentage of US employment have declined, but again, picking up in the last couple of years. You put the two trends together and you can see that a lot of the loss of manufacturing employment was due to the trade deficit. You can see a very tight correlation between the two here. Looking a little deeper at the US economy and trade, this graph in green for a variety of product categories, green shows exports, the things we sell to other people, red shows imports. You can see there's a lot more imports than you are exports. That's why we have a trade deficit. And when you dig deeper into this, it's clear that we import high-tech industrial products, motor cars, cell phones, computers, medicines, televisions, electronics, all this kind of thing we import. And in exports, we're pretty good at aerospace and defense that we sell around the world. But other than that, we look largely like a third world country. Petroleum exports, soybeans, corn, gold, all kinds of things that you would expect to be coming from a third world country, not from the leading economy in the world. And so the US used to look the opposite. It used to be very strong in exporting industrial products. That's not true today. My job is to bring it back. Your future jobs can be to help that happen. Fortunately, it is happening. We talk about reshoring or onshoring, means the same thing. US companies bringing manufacturing back to the country. There's also FDI, foreign direct investment. Foreign companies seeing that it makes sense to invest here. Toyota, Siemens, Hyundai, companies like that. Some people talk about localization, producing near the consumer. So all these trends are important and are helping to bring the work back to the US. Also helping is the fact that China, which has been such an important competitor, has seen its labor costs rising for the last years, 15, 20 years, going up at 10, 15% a year, starting very low, but going up substantially. That's the blue line you see up there. This is unit labor cost. So cost in dollars for labor to make the typical thing. So China's gone from being very cheap to being not so cheap anymore. Therefore, work is coming out of China, and increasingly the work is coming to the US. Global trade, that's the selling of goods between countries, has been declining. Used to be growing very rapidly, and now it's flat or declining. And the US, during the COVID crisis, saw the issue of not making the things we need. All of you saw on television the people in the hospitals that couldn't get the masks and the gowns and the gloves, and they couldn't get it because the US didn't produce many. We were so dependent on other countries to produce for us. And the economy, the country has started to recognize that the same holds true for rare earth minerals, for 5G. We all hear a lot about 5G. For apparel, we import 97% of the apparel that we consume. Even the military, every year or two, puts out a report on the products and components and materials it cannot find in the country, maybe cannot even find amongst our allies. It has to buy from China or Russia or someone like that, which isn't a good long-term plan for your military. Good news is reshoring and FDI are picking up nicely. So when I started this in 2010, in that year, the sum of the two was about 6,000 jobs announced. And by 2017, that had risen to 190,000 in the year, so up 30 times, driven by the tax and regulatory reductions that President Trump put through. But then President Trump's trade war caused business uncertainty, and both trends fell off in 2018 and 2019. But reshoring by US companies picked up very nicely in 2020, driven by COVID. Both companies deciding that they had to make those medical things here, but also other industries saying, look what happened to the medical industry. We should be simplifying our supply chains. We should be bringing the work back to the US. So companies think about the last 10 or 20 years, and we've had the tsunami in Japan, the COVID coming out of China. In Thailand, there were some bad floods some years ago that stopped delivery of all kinds of important products. There was a volcano in Iceland that stopped product from being air freighted into the US. We had our own LA dock strike that prevented product from entering. The Suez Canal just recently has been a major blockage for shipments. So the companies look at this and say, it's not safe to be so dependent on all this stuff coming in from all over the world. And so companies increasingly are putting their factories in the country where the product will be sold. For the case of the US, obviously that's the US. And so you put the assembly plant here and you bring your suppliers as close as you can to that assembly plant, preferably in the same town, ideally in the same country, at least in North America, with some work for Canada and Mexico, but taking out all that risk from trying to get things here from all over the world. As an example, a survey by BDO, a noted auditing and consulting company, asked companies, what are your plans for where you're going to manufacture? And 24% of them said they were going to relocate to another country. And 22% of those, so 90% of them, said they plan to reshore to bring the manufacturing back to the US. Probably not all their manufacturing, but at least some of their manufacturing. As youth today is especially empathic, and bringing manufacturing jobs back, I believe, is the best solution to our biggest problems. Think about our disadvantaged inner city populations. I saw an interview with a gang leader, young fellow, and they asked him, why'd you go in the gang? And he said, $12 an hour. I could not find a job for $12 an hour. Well, an apprenticeship starts typically at more than $12 an hour. So if he had had that opportunity, what a different life he would have had. At the same time, in the rural areas, we've had the opioid epidemic, which has been a disaster for many communities where factories have shut down. We have a problem now with recovery from COVID. Lots of unemployed salespeople, for example, from retail and from services. And I have this image of vacant strip malls near where people live being converted into small, clean factories, and people who used to sell products coming in and making those products so that others can sell them. And so we can produce them in the US instead of importing them from elsewhere. We have huge budget deficits getting worse with all the stimulus program. And the best solution to all of this is more manufacturing jobs, more people working here, less need for stimulus program, more people paying taxes. Even the environment. We've done studies of product made here versus made offshore and shipped here, and you reduce the CO2 footprint by 25 to 50% by manufacturing in the US instead of manufacturing, say, in China and shipping it to here. But companies might say, this is too expensive. I can't afford this. It'd be nice. It sounds good, but can't afford it. The US is too expensive. We say not necessarily. So we provide a tool called the TCO, Total Cost of Ownership Estimator, that helps the companies look at all their costs. And the curves, the first curve is, the blue curve is for price, the actual price at the factory. The TCO is red, and then yellow is if there happens to be a 15% Trump tariff. And when you shift your measuring tool from price to TCO, the percentage of the work that makes sense to produce in the US goes from 8% to 32%. And if there's a tariff, 46%. So it's very reasonable for companies to bring back 20, 30% of what they now import. And that's that career opportunity that you will find. As an example of this, a company called Moser Corp that makes printed circuit boards, populates them, things like you see here in the picture, came to me about 5 years ago, and they were about to lose a very big order. A lower priced Chinese competitor had come in lower than they with an important US customer. And so the VP sales, I helped him do this TCO calculation to show the customer that even though Moser's price was higher, the total cost to the customer, when you include duty, freight, carrying cost of inventory, intellectual property risk, all these things was lower. And this was the key to winning a $60 million order. And so this is a real, companies around the country are starting to use this methodology, both for sourcing, where am I going to buy it, and for selling and convincing my customer to decide to buy from me instead. So to see the impact of this on employment, which is what you're thinking about, your future employment, this chart shows the trend in US manufacturing employment at the end of each year. So you can see it starts with about 97, goes up to 2020. And so we took the blue dots and did a regression line through them. So the regression line is the line that best fits those blue dots. And you can see it trending off to the lower right. And then the red dots are the years since. And the conclusion from all this is that if the trend had continued as it was in those earlier years, the total manufacturing employment today would be 5 million lower than it is. So why isn't it down there? Why have we had the best years of improvement in manufacturing employment for the last 30 or 40 years? Because we're not offshoring as much, we're not moving factories off to other countries as much because the other countries aren't as attractive, and companies have learned about all those other costs that they ignored before, and we're reshoring substantial amounts of work to the US, like I showed you with the 190,000 per year, 150,000 jobs per year. It's not enough, and we still want to bring back millions more, but the trend, as you can see here, is definitely in the right direction. So when you think about your relatives or friends, fathers maybe, mothers who lost jobs in factories, sometimes with theft, yes, that happened. Things are much better today, and the future is very bright. So to segue over into more into the skilled workforce sides of things, a few years ago, the Department of Labor of the U.S. Called me down to Washington to advise them on how to get the workforce ready for reshoring. If all this work's going to come back, what do we have to do for the skilled workforce? So I'm sitting in the Secretary of Labor's conference room in DC, very nice place, with a bunch of the Department of Labor senior staff. And I said, well, first you have to get the Department of Labor to stop being part of the problem and become part of the solution. And they were a little shocked. And they said, okay, show us what you've got. And I pulled up one of their websites. And it was headlined Education Pays, and it shows income as a function of number of degrees, like high school, some college, associate degree, et cetera. And I said, I thought the Department of Labor was responsible for having the workforce we need, and that you were responsible for the apprentice programs and the certificates. They said, yeah. I said, well, why doesn't this say education and training pay, training being like apprenticeship, as opposed to education being like degrees? And why don't you show the income of apprentices, of people who graduated from an apprentice program and are now working, which will turn out to be about the same as the bachelor's degree. And by not showing that the ex-apprentice, the person who's graduated from an apprenticeship, is making an income comparable to that of a bachelor's degree, you're denying the American population the information they need to make good decisions, and I hope all of you will use to make your good decisions. And they folded immediately, and they changed the website to be much closer to what I suggested that they do. So I was delighted with their flexibility. So to put that a little bit in perspective, this is a virtuous cycle. Yeah? And so as reshoring happens, companies have to recruit more. They have to recruit you. And that adds more skilled workforce with new skills, increases productivity, makes the companies more competitive, more reshoring happens, more recruitment will happen. In the same sense as that reshoring happens, the companies get busy. They increase their capacity utilization, and therefore they can afford to invest more. They have to meet demand. So they make investments. They buy the newest, most productive toys, as I referred to before, and they become more competitive, and we get even more reshoring. So these are the cycles for skilled workforce and productivity. And to make this productivity happen, we need smart, motivated people like you to get on board, to join the industry, to get the best that we can out of those investments in capital equipment. So some thoughts on this. Harvard Graduate School of Education. You don't get any more Ivy League, any more liberal arts than this. And a while back, they said that college for all is no longer the logic. Instead, some kind of post-high school credential for all. So that can mean an apprenticeship. It can mean certificates and credentials. But just for society, for all of you to understand, university degrees per se are no longer the one-size-fits-all solution, but some kind of credential. Could be a degree, but for many, an apprenticeship or some credentials is the right solution. So another thought on this is Professor Carnival, probably the national expert on the subject. He pointed out that the associate degree holders often earn more than bachelor's degrees. Now, that's interesting. Associate degree in manufacturing technology, for example, and almost most insightful that occupation, not degree level, determines salary. So if you look at the government data, if you read the typical news, listen to television, go out and get a university degree, you're going to make millions of dollars more. No, go into manufacturing and you'll make more money. So to demonstrate this, I did a study. I took the government data on income as a function of age and field in which degree was granted, like engineering, mathematics, English, what have you. You can see the chart, the lines there. And I superimposed the income for a tool and die maker who went through an apprenticeship. So you can see it's pretty much close to the top amongst the groups. And then I took the tool and die maker and compared them to the English major. And you can see in the early years, the tool and die maker in apprenticeship starts low at the time. It's higher, much higher now, but pretty rapidly goes up. The English major starts with what is laughable now. I had $5,000 per year of cost of going to university, and then starts making money. The tool and die maker on average always makes more than the English major. And I took the amount by which the tool and die income exceeded the English major, paid half of that difference in taxes, because we all have to pay our fair share, as they say. And I invested the other half at 7% per year, historically a conservative number. And at the age of 49, the tool and die maker had $1 million more net worth than the English major. Now, a few English majors are going to go on and become presidents of big companies, or president of the United States maybe, or what have you. But on the average, for the tool and die maker is going to do better than the English major substantially. Another way of looking at this is ROI. ROI is return on investment. I put down $1. How much do I get back? What percentage of that dollar do I get back each year? And from the perspective of the worker, for example, with the tool and die apprenticeship, they get a 125% return on what they put into it, and the English graduate 6%. From the perspective of the country, what does that person do to create more jobs, pay taxes into the government, not take money out of the government, et cetera? Much higher returns for the tool and die as opposed to the English major. So for the individual and for their contribution to society, filling the need is substantial. I talked before about entrepreneurial opportunities. So I did a survey of NTMA shop owners, the people who own the shops that make the molds and the dies and the machine parts. And I asked them, what's your background, like apprentice or machining training, but not an apprentice? And how did you become the owner? Like I founded it, or I purchased it, or inherited it, what have you. And you can see a substantial number of the respondents, of the owners, were apprentice graduates or some kind of training like that. And basically most of them founded or purchased the companies. So it's clear that going into an apprenticeship, getting well trained, becoming really good at one of these skills provides a very real opportunity to go out and either purchase or found your own company. Be the boss, make it as big as you want to make it. I know people that have done that, and they have hundreds of people working for them, and they're extremely successful at what they do. And some very, very happy and very successful with 20, 30 people. So just to rub it in a little bit more on the liberal arts graduates, which some of you might be thinking liberal arts is a good field. This is an article about a competition where the barista, the worker at Starbucks or somewhere like that, pours milk into coffee, and they create the beautiful design, such as you can see there on the left. And some of these people are art majors, and this is the job by which they're expressing their artistic skill. It might be great, but probably isn't what they planned on when they invested in 4 or 6 years of university. This, I think, is just one of my favorite cartoons ever. I'll read it. I hate to be the one to tell you this, kid, but we all have PhDs in English literature. And this talks about supply and demand. The US produces way too many liberal arts university graduates and nowhere near enough tool and die makers, precision machinists, engineers, university engineers. And so the people that go into the fields where there's not excess supply and not enough demand, some of them wind up doing something that they didn't plan to do, such as these people working in the kitchen. And so I encourage you to go where there's lots of demand, not enough supply, such as tool and die, precision machining, robotics. One of these fields looks very attractive in comparison. So just to make that a little clearer, I met a fellow once who was one of the leaders of the Milwaukee Area Technical College. You can see it here, it's quite a big place. And he was very proud of the fact that even though Wisconsin has at least 36 graduate schools, meaning universities where you can go in and get a master's or a PhD, that Milwaukee Area Technical College has the greatest number of students that already have a bachelor's degree, because so many students, so many people go on and get the bachelor's degree, even a master's degree in some field, find that there's no income or not a sufficient income for them, and certainly nothing like what they planned. And then they come back to the Milwaukee Area Technical College to get a technical degree to study tool and die, precision machining, auto mechanics, something where they can actually get a good job and make a good living. So another piece of data I'd like you to remember is that at any point in time in the economic cycle and throughout the working career of workers, about 30%, 35% of those who have university degrees are in jobs that do not require a university degree, that a high school graduate, like that barista job, that a high school graduate could perfectly well do. And that's because we train too many liberal arts university graduates, not enough engineers, and by far not enough tool makers, precision machinists, et cetera. So that's why I can very honestly encourage you to go into the field. So I mentioned before the shirt, and like I say, we give this away to companies who tell us about their reshoring cases, but it also tells a story about great careers for you. We're a nonprofit with 32 sponsors. You can see them here. You see NTMA listed over here. I've been a proud member working with them for there's probably 35, 40 years now. Great organization. I'm proud of what they do. Proud to be associated with them. And then a group of other trade associations, companies, all kinds of groups. So this is how we think of ourselves. This is the little Dutch boy. You may have heard the story about he's walking along and he's in Holland, and the dike, the wall keeps the North Sea out of flooding Holland, and he sees a little hole and there's water coming out and little stones coming out, and the big stones are starting to vibrate. And he says, wow, I think this thing's going to go and we're going to be flooded, no food for a year, it's going to be horrible. So he sticks his finger in the hole and holds the whole thing together and hopes somebody finds him and repairs the dike and lets him go home. So if you say, I think I'll get a liberal arts degree anyway, and this is not going to be the best, probably the best for you. And whereas if you go into an apprenticeship, go to technical college, and get a good degree in manufacturing, then the future, you'll be helped restore that wall, and the future will be brighter for you and eventually for your children. So look forward to you joining me in manufacturing. It's been a wonderful career for me, and I hope you will make the same decision. Thank you.